Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. Sometimes it feels like the weight of the world is pressing down, and no matter how hard we try, the struggle never seems to end. That's exactly how Enrio felt. Alone, defeated, and on the verge of losing everything. A truck driver by trade, he had spent years working tirelessly to keep his business afloat, but with mounting debts and an uncertain future, he was running out of options. Then one fateful evening, an encounter with two stranded nuns changed the course of his life in ways he never could have imagined. What started as an act of kindness became a journey of transformation, one that would not only save him, but inspire countless others along the way. In today's story, we'll follow Enrio's incredible path from despair to hope, from struggle to purpose. You won't believe how a simple ride turned into the greatest blessing of his life. Before we dive into this heartwarming journey, take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. And tell us in the comments, do you believe small acts of kindness can truly change someone's life? Your answer might just inspire someone else to do good today. Enrio gripped the steering wheel tightly as he guided his truck down the lonely highway. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie twilight glow over the landscape. His thoughts were a tangled mess of unpaid bills, relentless creditors, and the painful reality that his livelihood was slipping through his fingers. He had spent years hauling cargo across the country, doing everything he could to stay afloat, but nothing seemed to be enough. The trucking business was unpredictable, and lately it felt like every road led to another dead end. The rumble of the engine was a familiar comfort, but tonight, even that couldn't quiet the storm raging inside him. His heart ached at the thought of losing his truck. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was his lifeline. If he couldn't make his next payment, everything he had worked for would be gone. And then what? What would he do? Where would he go? He sighed heavily, forcing himself to focus on the road ahead. It was then, in the dim glow of his headlights, that he saw them, two figures standing by the side of the highway. He squinted, trying to make out who they were. As he drew closer, his heart skipped a beat. Two nuns. They stood near a broken-down car, their habits swaying slightly in the evening breeze. One of them was waving her arm hesitantly, clearly hoping for someone to stop. Enrio's first instinct was to keep driving. He had his own problems. Why should he add someone else's troubles to his already overflowing plate? But something inside him, a tiny voice that refused to be ignored, urged him to slow down. With a reluctant sigh, he pulled his truck to the side of the road. As he climbed down from the cab, the nuns turned toward him, their faces etched with relief. "Good evening, sir," one of them said, her voice warm and kind. "Our car broke down, and we have no way to get to the orphanage. We tried calling for help, but no one has come. Would you be willing to give us a ride?" Enrio hesitated. He wasn't sure why, but something about the situation made him uneasy. He didn't have anything against nuns, of course, but he had learned the hard way that helping others often came with consequences. What if this delayed his trip? What if they asked for more than he could give? But then he looked into their eyes. There was no demand, no expectation, just quiet hope. He exhaled sharply. "Yeah, all right, hop in." The two nuns exchanged a grateful glance before climbing into the passenger seat of the truck. As Enrio pulled back onto the road, silence settled over them. He wasn't sure what to say. Small talk had never been his strong suit, and he had a feeling these women weren't interested in casual conversation. But to his surprise, it was one of the nuns who spoke first. "My name is Sister Clara," she said softly, "and this is Sister Teresa. Thank you for stopping." "Not many people would," Enrio shrugged. "I wasn't going to at first," he admitted, keeping his eyes on the road. "Figured someone else would come along eventually." "And yet you stopped," Sister Teresa said with a gentle smile. "That says a lot about you." He let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah? And what does it say?" "That you have a good heart," Sister Clara answered. even if you don't always let it show. Enrio didn't respond. He wasn't sure he believed that. Life had hardened him, forced him to make tough choices. He had learned that kindness didn't always pay off, and yet here he was, driving two strangers to an orphanage for no reason other than a feeling he couldn't quite explain. After a long stretch of silence, Sister Clara spoke again. "If you don't mind me asking, what weighs so heavily on your mind?" Enrio clenched his jaw. He wasn't one to spill his problems to strangers, but something about these women made it hard to lie. "Just bills," he muttered. "Debts, the usual." Sister Teresa nodded knowingly. Many people struggle, but struggles don't last forever. Sometimes when we least expect it, help arrives. Enrio scoffed. "Yeah, well, I won't hold my breath." The rest of the ride passed in relative silence, with only the occasional sound of the truck's engine filling the space. When they finally arrived at the orphanage, the nuns thanked him profusely before climbing out of the truck. Enrio expected them to disappear inside without another word, but instead they turned back to him. "Would you like to come in?" Sister Clara asked. Enrio frowned. "Why?" "Just for a moment," Sister Teresa added. "We'd love for you to see the place you've helped us return to." He hesitated. He didn't have time for this, but something told him that if he left now, he would regret it. With a reluctant sigh, he turned off the engine and followed them inside. The moment he stepped through the doors, he was hit by the sound of laughter, bright, unfiltered joy echoing through the halls. Children ran past, their faces alight with happiness, despite the worn-down state of the orphanage itself. The walls were covered in colorful drawings, and though the furniture was old, there was an undeniable warmth in the air. Father Matto, the orphanage's director, approached with a kind smile. "You must be the man who helped our sisters. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means to us." Enrio shifted uncomfortably. "It was nothing, just a ride." "Oh, it was much more than that," Sister Clara said, glancing at the children. "Every day we struggle to keep this place running. Donations are scarce, and some nights we wonder how we'll feed everyone, but we believe that kindness has a way of finding its way back to those who give it." Enrio felt a pang in his chest. These people had so little, yet they still found reasons to be grateful. Then, just as he was about to leave, Father Matto handed him an envelope. "For you," he said simply. Enrio furrowed his brow. "What is this?" "A token of appreciation," Sister Teresa said. "We don't have much, but we believe in helping those who help others." He opened the envelope hesitantly and froze. Inside was a collection of small donations gathered from the community. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to make a dent in his debts. Enough to keep his truck for a little while longer. His throat tightened. I can't accept this." "But you must," Sister Clara insisted. "It is given with love, and love must always be shared." Enrio was speechless. He had spent so long believing that life was nothing but hardship, that kindness was a luxury he couldn't afford. But in this moment, he saw things differently. Maybe, just maybe, there was still good in the world. As he left the orphanage that night, his heart felt lighter than it had in years. What would you have done in Enrio's place? Would you have accepted the help, or would your pride have made you refuse? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another inspiring tale. Enrio sat in his truck for a long time, staring at the envelope in his hands. The weight of it wasn't just in the paper and bills. It was in the meaning behind it. He had never been the type to accept charity, and he certainly hadn't expected it from strangers, but something about this felt different. This wasn't pity. This wasn't a handout. This was gratitude. As he turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from the orphanage, his mind raced with thoughts. He had spent years fighting for survival, believing that no one would ever come to his rescue. Yet here he was, carrying proof that kindness still existed in the world, But a question gnawed at him. Why? Why had these people, who had so little to give, chosen to help him? What had they seen in him that made them believe he deserved this? The thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Over the next few days, Enrio tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered like a stubborn shadow. He paid off part of his debt with the money from the orphanage, but instead of feeling relieved, he felt different, lighter. As if the burden he had carried for so long wasn't just financial, it was something deeper, something he hadn't even realized was weighing him down. Then, one evening, as he was driving down a familiar stretch of road, he saw it. A broken-down car on the side of the highway. A woman stood next to it, pacing anxiously as she spoke into her phone. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Enrio's foot hovered over the gas pedal. He could keep driving. This wasn't his problem. But something stopped him. Something small, yet undeniable. A memory. The way the nuns had stood in that exact same position. The way they had looked up with hope when he pulled over. Before he could overthink it, he flicked on his turn signal and pulled onto the shoulder. The woman turned, her eyes wary at first. But when he rolled down his window and asked if she needed help, her face softened with relief. "Yes," she breathed. "My car won't start, and my phone battery's about to die. I was trying to call a tow truck, but I don't know how long it'll take." Enrio nodded. "Pop the hood. Let's see what we're dealing with." The woman hesitated, then did as he asked. Enrio wasn't a mechanic, but years on the road had taught him a thing or two. It didn't take long to figure out the problem. A loose battery connection. A quick fix. As he tightened the cables and wiped his hands on his jeans, he glanced up at the woman. She was watching him, gratitude written all over her face. "You didn't have to stop," she said. "Most people wouldn't." Enrio shrugged, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something shift inside him. "Someone once told me that kindness has a way of finding its way back to those who give it," he said simply. The woman smiled. "That's a rare thing in this world." He didn't know what to say to that. Maybe it was rare, but maybe it didn't have to be. After making sure her car started again, he waved her off and climbed back into his truck. As he drove away, he realized something unexpected. He felt good, not just relieved, not just satisfied. Good. Like for the first time in years, he had done something that actually mattered, and he wasn't done yet. In the weeks that followed, Enrio found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before. A family stranded at a rest stop with a flat tire. A young boy shivering in the cold at a gas station, waiting for a ride that never came. A man struggling to carry heavy bags of groceries to his car. Each time, Enrio stopped. Each time, he helped. And each time, the feeling grew. It was no longer about repaying the kindness he had received. It was about something much bigger. It was about proving to himself that the world wasn't as cold as he had once believed. One evening, after a particularly long drive, Enrio pulled into a diner for a late meal. As he sat at the counter sipping his coffee, he overheard a conversation between two other truck drivers at a nearby table. "Man, times are tough," one of them was saying. "People don't care about each other anymore. Everyone's just out for themselves." Enrio's grip tightened around his cup. Was that really true? Had the world always been this way, or had people simply stopped believing in kindness? An idea formed in his mind. A crazy idea. But the best ideas usually were. That night, Enrio reached out to a few truckers he had met over the years, men and women who, like him, had spent their lives on the road. He told them about the nuns, about the orphanage, about how one small act of kindness had changed his entire perspective. And then he proposed something bold. "What if we started something?" he asked. "A network of truckers willing to help those in need, not just when it's convenient, not just when it's easy, but whenever we can, however we can." At first there was silence. Then one by one voices chimed in. "That's not a bad idea. I've always wanted to do something like that. Man, imagine how many people we could help." The excitement spread like wildfire, and just like that, a movement was born. A network of truck drivers dedicated to looking out for people on the road, offering help when it was needed most. What had started as one simple act of kindness had turned into something bigger than Enrio had ever imagined. But here's the real question: would you have done the same? If you had been in Enrio's shoes, would you have stopped to help that woman on the side of the road? Would you have accepted the kindness from the nuns, or would your pride have held you back? Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you believe kindness still has a place in this world, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications. Let's prove that small acts of compassion can create ripples that go farther than we ever expect. At first, the idea was simple: truckers helping people on the road when they could. But as the days passed, something unexpected started happening. Word spread. A driver helped a stranded family on a deserted highway, and they told their friends about it. Another trucker paid for a struggling waitress's meal, and she shared the story on social media. Then a trucker delivered extra supplies to a shelter during a storm, and a local newspaper picked up the story. Before long, Enrio's phone was buzzing non-stop. Messages flooded in, not just from fellow truckers, but from everyday people who had heard about what they were doing. "I love what you guys are doing. How can I help? I don't drive a truck, but I want to be part of this. I've been struggling lately, and seeing this gave me hope. Thank you." Enrio was stunned. He had never imagined that one small decision to stop for two stranded nuns would turn into something this big. But the real surprise came a few weeks later when he received a call from Father Mato. "Enrio, you need to come to the orphanage," the priest said, his voice thick with emotion. Enrio's stomach clenched. "Is something wrong?" "No, my son. Something is very, very right." Curious and a little nervous, Enrio made the drive back to the orphanage. When he arrived, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. Dozens of people standing outside, talking, laughing, sharing food. There were truckers he recognized, families from the town, and even complete strangers. Sister Clara and Sister Teresa were waiting for him near the entrance, beaming. "What's going on?" Enrio asked, stepping out of his truck. "This," Sister Clara said, gesturing toward the crowd, "is the kindness you started." Enrio looked around in confusion. "I don't understand." Sister Teresa stepped forward, holding out a thick envelope. "Donations from people who heard your story, people who were inspired by what you did." Enrio's breath caught in his throat. He took the envelope with trembling fingers and flipped through the bills inside. It was more money than he had ever seen in one place, enough to not only help the orphanage, but to change lives. He swallowed hard. "This wasn't me," he said, shaking his head. "This was all of you." Father Mato placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, Enrio, it started with you. A single act of kindness is like a spark. You never know how far the fire will spread." Enrio felt a lump rise in his throat. He had spent so many years believing the world was cruel and unforgiving, that people only looked out for themselves, that kindness was a weakness. But he had been wrong. It wasn't a weakness, it was a power, and he had witnessed its strength firsthand. That night, as the orphanage filled with laughter, stories, and shared meals, Enrio realized something he had never expected. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was living. The following weeks were a blur. The movement continued to grow, with truckers from all over the country joining in. Some delivered supplies to struggling families. Others helped fix cars on the side of the road. Some even took time off to volunteer at shelters and food banks. And the best part, it wasn't just truckers anymore. People from all walks of life were joining in. Teachers, shop owners, mechanics, single parents, each of them finding their own way to spread kindness. One day, Enrio received a message from a young man who had been struggling with depression. "I was in a dark place," the message read. "I had given up on people. But then I saw what you were doing, and it made me believe again. I started helping where I could, small things at first. And you were right. It changes you. Thank you for reminding me that there's still good in the world. Enrio stared at the words, his chest tightening. He had never set out to inspire anyone. He had never planned for any of this to happen. And yet, here it was. Proof that one choice, one decision, one act of kindness could create ripples that reached farther than he ever imagined. And so, he made a new promise to himself. He would never stop. Because the world didn't need more people looking out for themselves. It needed more people willing to stop, to help, to give. But now he had to ask you. If you were in Enrio's shoes, would you have stopped for the nuns that night? Would you have let kindness change your life? Or would you have kept driving, thinking it wasn't your problem? Tell us in the comments below. Your answer might just inspire someone else to do the right thing. And if you believe in the power of kindness, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications. Together, we can prove that one small act of compassion can change the world. Enrio never thought he'd see the day when people called him an inspiration. He had spent so much of his life just trying to get by, never imagining that his choices could have a real impact on others. But here he was, watching the movement grow beyond anything he had ever expected. At first, it had been just a handful of truckers lending a helping hand on the road. Then, as stories spread, more and more people wanted to be involved. The kindness wasn't just staying within the trucking community, it was reaching neighborhoods, small towns, and even big cities. One day, Enrio received a message that stopped him in his tracks. It was from a single mother named Maria. She wrote about how she had been struggling to feed her 2 children after losing her job. She had gone to a grocery store, hoping to stretch the last of her money, when something unexpected happened. "The cashier told me my groceries were already paid for," she wrote. "A truck driver had covered the bill. When I turned to thank him, he was already gone." Enrio felt a lump rise in his throat. Maria continued, "I don't know who he was, but if you see this, I just want to say thank you. You don't know what this meant to me." Enrio shared the message with the trucker community, and almost immediately, a response came in. "That was me," one driver admitted. "I just did what I thought was right." Others began chiming in. "I bought lunch for a homeless man at a rest stop yesterday. I helped an elderly couple change a tire last night. I paid for a kid's bus fare when I saw he didn't have enough money." Story after story poured in. It wasn't about big, grand gestures. It was about the small moments, the ones that people usually overlooked. And as these stories spread, something incredible happened. Strangers started joining in. People who had never met Enrio, who had never even heard of the trucker movement, started paying for strangers' meals, helping stranded drivers, donating to shelters. One night, Enrio was scrolling through social media when he saw a post that nearly took his breath away. A man had left a note on a stranger's windshield. It read, "I saw that your parking meter was about to expire, so I put some extra coins in for you. No need to pay me back, just pass it on when you can. Kindness always finds its way home." The caption under the photo read, "I don't know who started this movement, but I love it." Enrio smiled to himself. It didn't matter if they knew his name. It didn't matter if they ever found out where it all began. What mattered was that it was working. The ripple effect was real. But then, just when things seemed to be at their peak, Enrio received another phone call. It was from Sister Clara. "Enrio," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "We need your help." His heart pounded. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath. "The orphanage is in trouble." The words hit him like a ton of bricks. They had come so far. How could this be happening now? Without hesitation, Enrio promised to come right away. When he arrived at the orphanage, he could feel the tension in the air. The children were still playing, laughing, but the worry on the adults' faces told a different story. Father Matto greeted him with a weary sigh. "We received notice from the city," he explained. "They're planning to sell the land. If we can't come up with the money to buy it, we'll be forced to relocate." Relocate? Enrio repeated, his stomach twisting. Where? The priest shook his head. That's the problem. There's nowhere else to go. This has been our home for years. If we lose it, I don't know what will happen to the children. Enrio clenched his fists. He couldn't let that happen, not after everything they had done for him, not after everything they had taught him about kindness. Taking a deep breath, he turned to Father Matto. How much do you need? The priest hesitated, then named the amount. It was a lot. More than Enrio had, more than any one person could come up with on their own. But he wasn't just one person anymore. He had a whole community behind him. Enrio pulled out his phone and recorded a short video. He stood in front of the orphanage, his face serious but determined. This place changed my life, he began. When I was at my lowest, they reminded me that kindness still exists. Now, they need our help. The city is trying to take this land, and if we don't act fast, these kids will lose their home. He paused, then looked directly into the camera. If you've ever believed in kindness, if you've ever wanted to make a real difference, now is the time. Let's show the world what happens when good people come together. He posted the video. Then he waited. At first, nothing happened. Then a few donations started trickling in, $100 here, $50 there, and then it exploded. Truckers from all over the country shared the video. People from different states, even different countries, started contributing. Within hours, the fundraiser was trending. Within days, they had surpassed their goal. And when the time came to purchase the orphanage's land, they didn't just have enough money. They had more than they needed. Enough to renovate the orphanage. Enough to provide better resources for the children. Enough to ensure that no child there would ever have to wonder where their next meal was coming from. When Enrio handed the check to Father Matto, he saw tears well up in the priest's eyes. You did this, the priest whispered. Enrio shook his head. No, we did this. All of us. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything Enrio had ever experienced. People from all walks of life gathered at the orphanage to celebrate. Strangers who had donated online showed up in person, eager to see the place they had helped save, and as Enrio stood among them listening to the laughter of the children, he realized something profound. This was what life was supposed to be about. Not just surviving, not just getting by, but lifting each other up, helping where you can, making the world a little brighter, one act of kindness at a time. So now let me ask you, what would you have done? If you had been in Enrio's position, would you have fought for the orphanage? Would you have believed that a single person could make such a difference? Or would you have thought it was impossible? Tell us in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone to take action. And if you believe in kindness, if you believe in the power of people coming together, show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications. Let's prove that goodness is still alive in the world. In the weeks that followed, Enrio couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that one fateful night. What started as a simple act of kindness, picking up two stranded nuns, had transformed into something so much bigger than himself. It had sparked a movement, a chain reaction of generosity that stretched farther than he ever imagined. The orphanage was safe. Not just for now, but for generations to come. The children had a home, the nuns had the resources they needed, and the community that had come together in their time of need had proven something undeniable. Kindness still existed in the world, but Enrio knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. One afternoon, he found himself back at the orphanage, sitting on a bench outside as the children played in the yard. Sister Clara sat beside him, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. You changed so many lives, Enrio, she said softly. He shook his head, chuckling under his breath. I didn't change anything. I just made a choice. A choice, she repeated. That's all it takes. Enrio watched as a little boy shared his toy with another child, both of them giggling with delight. He thought back to all the people who had been inspired by this journey, the truckers, the strangers, the everyday folks who had chosen to step up, to help, to give. And he realized something. People weren't waiting for kindness to find them anymore. They were choosing it, and that was the most powerful thing of all. He stood up, stretching his arms. "I should get back on the road." Sister Clara smiled knowingly. "Where are you off to this time?" Enrio exhaled, looking toward the horizon. "Wherever I'm needed." With one last glance at the children playing, he turned and walked toward his truck, a sense of purpose burning deep in his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. As he climbed into the driver's seat, he reached for his phone and sent out a message to his network of truckers. "Let's keep it going," he wrote. "Let's keep making a difference, 1 mile at a time." And with that, he started the engine and drove off, knowing that the road ahead was filled with endless opportunities to change lives. Now, let me ask you one last time. Would you have stopped that night? Would you have let kindness into your life the way Enrio did? Or would you have kept driving, never knowing the impact one small choice could make? Let us know in the comments. Your words might inspire someone to take action. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness, then show your support. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because the world needs more stories like this. Stories that prove that even the smallest act of compassion can change lives in ways we never expect. And who knows, maybe the next act of kindness will be yours.